So yes, my name's Liz Harris. I'm the Environmental Officer at Solent University and also a member of the board at Future South. Delighted to be chairing this afternoon's panel on nature-based solutions in relation to COP26. We've got a really great panel, really interested to hear and have some good discussion on this topic. My role covers a multitude of things within the university, you know, all the bits of environment that an institution covers. The good thing about Solent is we have, I was just telling David, we also have our Warsash campus and our Timsbury Lake campus near Romsey, where our maritime school carry out operations, training, and they're both really beautiful sites with their own conservation sort of after uses and issues. So yes, I'm really interested in this session to see what we can cover. Just a note to the panel: if you can keep your microphones muted when you're not talking, just so we don't get feedback, that would be really helpful. And what we'll do, we'll go around and introduce everyone, and then we'll hopefully be some good questions in the chat that we can pick up. It was interesting this morning. I think Ben sort of set out the kind of guiding principles for this. We want to think about what's within our region that makes us special. What are the opportunities that we have? What's our identity that means that we can make such a positive contribution, an impactful contribution? And that was the other point, really. What do we want? We want to make it impactful, and we want to identify regional opportunities for change. So just to keep that in mind as we chat. So without further ado, I'll go around my screen and we'll get everyone to introduce themselves. So if I could start, please, with Allison Barnes. Welcome.
Thanks, Liz. Afternoon, everyone. So my name's Allison Barnes. I'm the Chief Executive at New Forest National Park Authority. So to answer your question about the resource, I'm hoping that obviously the New Forest is at front of mind as one of them, and the coastline and the forest there. And I'm also the convener of the Green Halo Partnership, which some of you might have heard of, which is really looking at natural capital and how different, partners, players, if you want to call them that, across our region can come together on a vision around that. So great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Very much. Begonia.
Hello everyone, thank you Liz and Future South. So I am an environmental lawyer, and I have been for over 20 years now, working across air pollution, water pollution. I see the other side of it, I guess, and ESG and climate change and TCFD disclosures at the moment. So I'm also a Future South board member, and I am a partner at Acuity Law, and I run a consultancy called Eric Group, which I do more sort of academic work through. I'm really interested in today because I think that the law has a really big part to play to drive climate resilience, and it might have to take the role of pushing along to change behaviors. And that will come, I think, from businesses being transparent about their effects on the environment and the effects the environment can have on them. Thank you.
Very much. Rachael, if I could pass over to you.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Professor Rachael James from the University of Southampton School of Ocean and Earth Science. I'm a professor in geochemistry, and I'm here today because I do research and have an actively doing looking at nature-based and technological solutions for carbon dioxide removal. And carbon dioxide removal is going to be needed in addition to emissions reduction in order for us to meet our Paris Agreement targets.
Thanks very much, Rachael. Joanne.
Afternoon, Liz. Thanks for inviting us onto the panel. My name's Dr. Joanne Preston, and I'm a reader in marine ecology and evolution, but in short terms, I'm a marine biologist based at the University of Portsmouth. I've been working alongside various partners, including Blue Marine Foundation, to establish oyster restoration, seagrass and salt marsh restoration in the Solent, and co-founded the Native Oyster Network in the UK.
Thanks very much. Sarah Jane.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. I'm Sarah Jane Chimwandira. I'm the Chief Executive of Surrey Wildlife Trust, so I hope not too much of an interloper because I live in East Hampshire. I'm also the chair of the Surrey Nature Partnership, which has been developing the natural capital approach for Surrey and authored the Natural Capital Investment Plan for Surrey in 2018. I'm also a board member for the Enterprise M3 Local Enterprise Partnership and the chair of their Clean Growth Forum, and I'm really passionate about how we look at an integrated approach to economic recovery, delivering systemic investment in our natural assets, but also securing that health and well-being and opportunities for jobs. So that integration of multi-beneficial outcomes is what I'm really interested in.
Super, thank you. And David.
Good afternoon, thank you, Liz. It's great to be here. Yeah, my name is David Tudor. I'm the projects director at Blue Marine Foundation. We're a global marine conservation charity. Our work really covers fisheries management, overfishing, and creation and improvement of MPAs. But particularly, I suppose for today, we're working more and more on restoration, as Joe mentioned, integrated restoration in the Solent, for example, and also working in Sussex around the kelp area. But we're also very interested in blue carbon and been working on that, not just from a restoration and protection point of view, but also the potential to think about offsetting and getting carbon credits going to bring more money into conservation, really.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'm hoping we'll start getting some questions popping into the Q&A box. So everyone, do start adding your questions. I'm thinking back to one of the sessions we had earlier, and perhaps we might want to pause on, have a think about this one, and come back to it. But within this area, what are the asks of the COP26 process that ensures that we can embed nature-based solutions absolutely and fully within the COP process and what's decided? So what would be, I guess, your ask for the COP process on that? And I'm just going back to the Q&A, which has disappeared from my box. Isn't that interesting? I don't know if anyone else can see.
We haven't got it, Liz.
Okay, all right, it's not just me. Okay, hopefully one of our behind the scenes team can perhaps restore the Q&A. If not, perhaps if people would like to post in the chat, which does appear to still be active, that would be useful. Okay, so within your area that you're working on, what would you say would be the ask of the COP process? What do you want to see coming out of November's conference from governments? And be that, I guess, at a nation state level, but also what you'd like to see perhaps translated locally within the region. Would anyone like to go first on that one? Joanne, thank you.
So I think now's the time for action. I think, on all counts, I think we've accrued quite a lot of knowledge so far. There's some more gaps that we need to fill. So I think we need action about scaling up the things that we know work. I think we need clear funding lines to quantify the ecosystem services we need to unlock the finance mechanisms, be the denitrification rates of oysters, the carbon flux across seagrass and salt marshes. We need to get that tied down so we can move to an accredited system for blue carbon that enable the unlocking of that financial flow for nature-based solutions. And I also think that we need high-level mandate from government to back up this action. Hopefully that will come through COP26. And to echo what Sarah Jane said, we really need to start looking at this seascape level, you know, and even further beyond the integrated catchment. But overall, it's time for action.
Great. That's great, thank you. And actually, I think that's being picked up actually in the questions. Yeah, opportunities. Yeah, and that's interesting. Yeah, nature conservation being seen as the poor relation on many levels. That would be interesting to get, your thoughts on that. I do know where that person is coming from. So yeah. So okay, carrying on the opportunity through COP. Who would like to go next to follow on from Joanne? Sarah Jane.
Lovely, thank you very much. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is actually, in addition to COP26, what I would really ask is that we don't forget that we also have COP15 this year, because the climate and biodiversity crises are inextricably linked. And whilst I welcome the focus on COP26, of course, if we don't think about COP15 and the opportunities that presents to us as well, I feel that we are not addressing one of the biggest factors in play at the moment, which is the fact that nature-based solutions addresses both nature crises and climate crises at the same time. So something that does two jobs for one, for me, has got to be a good thing. We all like a buy one get one free offer at the supermarket, don't we? So I really feel that actually ignoring COP15 is a real shame. So that would be my first plea. But then my second plea would absolutely be to support what Joanne said. We've got to get on with it now. We've got to start getting into the nitty-gritty of what the practicalities look like of doing different financial deals, of getting a supply of projects going. So one of the things that we're really focused on is what is our supply, our project pipeline over the next 15, 20 years, because if we don't have that, it makes it much harder to raise some of the finance. So those are the sorts of things that we're spending energy on, and that I would really make an ask around. Thanks.
Super, thank you. David.
Thanks, Liz. I think for me it's probably unlikely, but what I'd like to see really is a recognition of marine habitats as part of the solution. And what I mean by that is, just to follow up on what Joe said, is that whether it's in the nationally defined contributions, or whether it's just a recognition that marine habitats, whether it's seagrass or salt marsh, do lock in carbon, but also that the sediments. So there's a pretty seminal paper by Emmerich Salar that has come out recently, trying to account for the amount of sediment locked up in the seabed, in the deep sea, in the sands and the sediments. And what I'm saying is, I'm not asking for countries to start to say as an excuse, oh, well, there's loads of carbon locked up offshore, let's not worry about reducing our emissions, our terrestrial emissions, it's all fine offshore. What I'm saying is that these sediments, these habitats need protection for their carbon value as well as their biodiversity value. In other words, as kind of Sarah's pointed out, this isn't a battle between biodiversity and carbon. These are stocks are important, whether it's carbon, whether it's other ecosystem services. But having a recognition of those marine ecosystems as being important for carbon as well, I think it'd be fantastic.
Thanks, David. And actually, I think we'll come with the questions popped in on offsets actually, and around particularly, I'd say that the local marine ones will come onto that. Anyone else on? Alison.
Yeah. So what we're talking about with the national park family is something called Netzero with nature, as a sort of capture that. I think I think somebody's put in the chat, there seems to be a kind of dichotomous approach within the environment sector. I'm not sure it's just dichotomous, it's multichotomous. That's probably not a word, but there is a real need for our sector to come together. I think Sarah Jane, you've heard me say this because we've obviously talked a lot about our complementary pincer movement approaches, from each side around natural capital. But, this friendly fire between different factions, if you want to call it that, of the sector needs to stop. This isn't an ask for COP. I think it's probably an ask of our own behaviour, if you like, around COP. And I think it's great that Future South are essentially breaking that down by bringing us all together today. So we always, we get to the discipline of saying net zero with nature. And then, so what does that mean? It means that we look for natural solutions very much in the forefront. Because actually you could have a lot of innovations for carbon capture that actually are not good for the natural environment discussed. So we have to really kind of be disciplined about that, I think. And I think the concentration on 30 by 30, which is 30% of the lands, put aside for nature, or at least supporting nature, is really a positive hook as well. And I love the way that Jane said bog off, because it is quite a lot about peat, actually. Sorry. But I think the other thing I would ask is that at a lot of international events, we forget. I would ask that the action reflects the zeitgeist, which is that many people are really now passionate about coming out of COVID better, addressing climate, nature and health emergencies together. And we've got to do things that really harness those hearts as well as the minds, the great minds that we have around the table today. So let's, like Jane has said, look towards this pipeline of projects. And, yeah, we've got some big ones that we've talked about today, some of which I just don't understand, I guess. But, there's a lot of small actions that we need to recognise as part of that collaboration and that direction. So there's something about always being disciplined around with nature, and also local delivery coming to the fore, and just, working together as a sector.
Thank you, Alison. Begonia.
Thank you, Liz. I think three things really, and picking up on what all of the other panelists have talked about. The first thing, I think COP26 is going to have a huge focus on finance and financing decarbonisation. So in one of the previous sessions on transport, it was said, and I completely agree, one of the biggest issues we have is that we need a massive amount of money to invest in infrastructure. And that goes for mobility infrastructure or natural capital infrastructure, if you like. So I would plead that they come to an agreement on how this is going to be financed, because no one knows at the moment. The second thing, I think, and that links in, it's I think businesses need to start being and charities and local authority, that everyone has to be really transparent about their impact on the environment and how they can improve the environment as well. We need a lot of, as Alison said, there's a lot of talk across so many sectors, and we need that to be very, very focused and transparent. And I know that the government has just closed a consultation on mandatory reporting for the task force on TCFD, which looks at sort of who in the organization deals with the governance of climate change, how does the strategy of the organization embed climate change resilience. So I think that those two go together. And the last point, which Sarah, you talked about, or the conventions. I worked for CMS for the Conservation of Migratory Species Convention for 4 years on governance. And I completely agree with you. It is what sometimes it's what takes the limelight, but there's a huge amount of UNEP treaties. These are UNEP treaties, and under them are, so we have the sort of CMS, CITES, we have, UNFCCC, we have a huge amount of treaties, and some of them do get forgotten at other times. And one of the projects I worked on with a team on governance was, how can we get the international treaties to work together? And it's a really difficult task, because each treaty is a powerhouse in itself, with its own secretariat, with its own scientific committee and councils, with their own so it's really difficult. But that I have seen movements of that happening. So I would say to COP26, open your arms for more collaboration with the other treaties, because when we look at natural capital, it's essential that they open up a bit more. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry, Liz.
That's okay. Well, hopefully that will be picked up in the next session, which is on climate finance, because I think that's something certainly to put to Andreas about how he sees this being facilitated. Absolutely. Rachael, yes, would you? Yeah, please come in.
Coming in at a slightly different angle here, but my experience in this field thus far is that with all these nature-based solutions, the key issue at the moment is that there are no unified monitoring, reporting and verification methodologies for quantifying the amount of carbon that's taken up. And I think that is a massive hindrance to developing nature-based solutions and convincing people that this is a way to go.
Yeah, super. I see lots of the panel nodding there. Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to link then two questions that are in the Q&A, and it's back to the O word. Offsetting or paying for indulgences, depending on who you talk to. Does the panel see opportunities for the region for nature-based solutions? But I'm guessing I'm asking linked to offsetting, and I'm thinking of David and Joanne's work on seagrass and marine habitats as well, how we're not uniquely placed, but so well placed. There's obviously opportunities there for restoration, habitat creation, but is there a risk that organisations could try and claim offsetting credits for supporting that work that might otherwise have already gone ahead, perhaps? So yes, a question around offsetting, but other opportunities for the region. Perhaps David, yeah, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, I'll start off. I think there's a few things here really. I think firstly, as we've seen with the concept of biodiversity offsetting, the phrase a license to trash. So in other words, you can do what you want as long as you offset it. That's all. I think that's always a danger with any kind of offset, whether it's a biodiversity or a carbon offset. And then, as you kind of touched on, really that issue of additionality, I think is absolutely key. And some of the work that we're considering at the moment is around if you protect an area of sea, call it a marine protected area, what's the additionality of that? What was happening anyway? Was an area already closed to trawling, for example, or was there any development happening? So there's always a risk of kind of almost designating areas as an offset, which, as you say, weren't really under threat. But I think all of those are surmountable. They are difficult, but surmountable. I think as Rachel's touched on, she mentioned the word kind of the verification. So the verification of an offset for in the marine environment is very nascent. I think I might be slightly off here, but I think there's one, maybe two verified carbon project in the world. And that's mangrove. There's no mangrove in the south of England, that's for sure. But that's not to say that, of course, seagrass, salt marsh, they sequester carbon, they pull it in. But then you get to the questions around oysters, and then you certainly get to the questions around seaweed and kelp. Again, definitely sequester carbon, but if they're all ripped up in a storm and drift off somewhere, well, how can you even sell a credit to somebody? So there's quite a process here of verification, working with landowners, and understanding the science very, very particularly. I'm sure Joan knows definitely knows more about that than me. But there's no doubt that there's carbon there. There's no doubt it needs protection. There's no doubt it needs restoration as well. Giving nature a helping hand. But I think as long as one goes down that process and has in mind, well, is this just an excuse to carry on burning fossil fuels? Well, that's what we've got to avoid in all of that as well, really. So it's a complex path that we're all walking on, and I think it's one that needs to be treaded carefully, really.
Joanne.
Yeah, so I think look at a slightly different angle is that already we know that the Solent, the biotopes and the Solent offer in terms of climate mitigation around and nutrient reduction between 1.1 and 10 million pounds of natural capital value in terms of the nitrogen, phosphate and carbon they either draw down or sequester. And so I think sometimes you can look at the system from a different area, different point of view, put it on its head. So what is the restoration goal? If we wanted to provide a certain percent increase in biodiversity, a certain amount increase in the amount of nitrates and phosphate reduced, taken out from the water column, and the amount of carbon drawn down, what would we need to restore to achieve that? And therefore you have this need to quantify those ecosystem processes which aren't fully done for seagrasses, salt marshes and oysters for the European species and UK species. So that's an important part of the puzzle. And then of course we need the mechanisms, the financial frameworks around it and all the dangers everyone's spoken about. But first of all, we need to see what's possible and what we need the environment to do for us. And therefore you get a way of then mapping what we've got, mapping what we could do, which also maintains other important sediments, because the blue carbon habitats aren't the only ones that do the important work, and look at the range of services that these habitats provide rather than just going down one track of blue carbon, because you're missing other tricks along biodiversity, nitrates and phosphates, which are really important as well. So I would recommend looking at it from that angle and then get the mechanisms in place for the finance. Of course, there's always the danger, but we're nowhere near that danger because we're not restoring what we need to yet.
I saw Begonia had your hand up.
Yes, I thought it might be interesting to the audience, and the panel is probably aware of the nitrates issue in the Solent, because we are here in the Solent, and how development came to a standstill when European case law, followed by Natural England, said no more development, no more overnight stays unless you become nitrate neutral. Of course, that became a huge problem because the government has certain house building targets, and there was a real conflict between Natural England's position and the sort of government's position of building houses. So the way that they got round it, to bring to David's point, is having this nitrate neutral. So if you take out agricultural land, you get certain credits. If you take out pig or cattle grazing land, you get certain credits. And for those credits, you then can build X amount of houses. So planning authorities were doing that, were doing this balancing act. Now, that didn't really solve the nitrate issue in the Solent as such. So that sort of wasn't addressed. The other issue is that there is no accounting mechanism for local authorities across the Solent to keep track of all these nitrates that have been taken out, put in, back in. So as Rachael said, assessing, monitoring, that we don't have a standard across the UK, and we need to invest in that. The other point I wanted to make was the 25-year plan and the Environment Act, because that looks at biodiversity offsets for planning. But it also is forcing the government to set, and it's going through Parliament at the moment, the bill, so it's quite an interesting time, but it's going to ask of the government to set certain targets, and look at the 25-year plan, and there we look at natural capital and we look at offsetting. So I think the government is doing some work and on this, and it will be very interesting to see how this comes out. But we're looking at October 2022 to get these targets. So we're behind with the bill, and nature can't wait, unfortunately. But because of COVID, everything's been delayed.
yeah, we touched on the Environment Bill earlier and a few people's frustrations with where we are with it, definitely. Alison.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that bothers me a lot is I'm banging on about a partial approach, because those of us who trained as ecologists know that it's about a system, it's ecosystem approach. So this is where, natural capital baselines, for example, and opportunity maps around carbon, but other, benefits such as nitrate, absorption and health and well-being, we can list them all. I think we've got to get into the whole system approach and start using that toolkit. I mean, certainly we've just got a baseline that has been funded through the LEP around new forest catchment with the Natural Capital Research Details Consultancy. So we're really excited to know what we're going to be able to do with that as a sort of engine room. And I know Sarah Jane will be able to comment as well. But, what is worrying for me is that, I'm really, really pleased that we've got solutions such as, upland peat or tree planting or, marine, zostra beds or whatever it is. But if we just dangle one carrot in front of, say, governments, they'll just eat that carrot and the rest will go to pot. And certainly I'm feeling a little bit left out in the lowlands in relation to investment in carbon, because we've got a little bit of peat in places like the New Forest, but not a lot. We've got some trees, but we probably don't want to plant them on important habitats like lowland heathlands. And the southeast is one of the most wooded areas in the country. But we should still be able to get investment into our natural solutions. So we need to pull together what our ecosystem of natural solutions are, and we need to make the case for investment in those. And I think going into offsetting, insetting, if we have that portfolio, we can ask our businesses in our area to be investing in our carbon sequestration and issues and net zero. And, I'm not saying that we don't need to push forward with all those other things. Please don't misunderstand me. But in terms of ecosystem functionality, I worry that we are not, we're just so pleased that someone's listening to us. We give them a few solutions, but as ecologists, we know that that is just, very much the first step of the journey.
Yeah, Sarah Jane, I was thinking, coming in on Thames Basin Heaths and your lovely wooded county, what were your thoughts on on Allison?
Really interesting, thanks Liz. And actually, obviously, I really support what Alison has just said, and she and I over the years have spoken about this many times. I think my view on offsetting is that the first thing that we have to recognise is that we have been having incredibly damaging impacts for the last 50 to 100 years on our ecosystems, if I could describe it in that way, and on our climate, and we haven't accounted for the negative impacts that we've been having. And that is one of the reasons why we're in the situation that we're in now, where it's a crisis and we have to actually do something quite urgently before we reach tipping points beyond which we cannot retrieve the situation. So for me, offsetting is a very important tool in the toolbox to restore our ecosystems and to deal with both climate adaptation and mitigation. But I would never look at offsetting in isolation, because offsetting is only part of the story that we need to tell at the moment. And it's about thinking about how do we also create opportunities for nature-based solutions which are not about offsetting, but are actually about restoring something that over the last 50 years we've lost a huge amount of. And one of the things that we've been focusing on is biodiversity net gain, which Begonia mentioned earlier. And that the reason we focused on that is because it does have some metrics around it. So in terms of starting to develop a pipeline of deals, if you like, that you can do, there are metrics available to level the playing field. And what we're saying is that 20% biodiversity net gain should be our absolute minimum. Going back to the point Alison made, this is about a whole ecosystem approach, and it's about putting back the pieces of the puzzle that we've destroyed or are missing now. So one of the things that is missing for us for carbon, which I feel very strongly in Surrey, is that we don't have the metrics for carbon around different habitats, hedgerows, chalk grassland, our lowland heathlands, and we do need those to do transparent deals to get financing into those habitats as well. So I think that there is a really important place for offsetting, but it's not the whole story. I mean, the other thing I was just going to mention is you've got a group of people here. We're all, you know, we've got knowledge in our own different areas of expertise. And again, this is something that Alison and I have discussed in the past. There is a role for leadership here. There is a real role for us to come together with our knowledge and expertise and kind of all pull in the same direction so that we can actually meet these challenges. So that's why convening discussions like this, I think, is incredibly valuable.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Rachel, I was going to bring you in, and actually partly because I'd quite like your thoughts on this verification and methodology issue that keeps coming up, and the lack of metrics. There's a question in the box about, is it something that can be done regionally to help address and improve this? And if so, what? But I wondered what you might like to say.
I don't think it's a regional problem at all. It's obviously a global problem, and it's certainly something that we are lobbying for the IPCC to do something about. You know, it's not, I come across it because I do something called enhanced rock weathering, where we add crushed up material to agricultural crops, and we harness the photosynthetic energy of those crops to enhance carbon dioxide drawdown. And it's true from a soil organic carbon perspective, from a biomass perspective. It's not just quantities of carbon dioxide removed, it's also about security of storage. And that's another issue that with nature-based solutions that comes up time and time again. You know, how long are you taking this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for? The point I wanted to just bring in here is that, you know, to reiterate again that offsetting emissions is not enough. We need negative emissions. And I've heard a lot of discussion about offsetting, which worries me, because actually the message is way more than that. We need negative emissions. And just thinking about what opportunities there are in the south for that, you know, obviously we do have the ocean there, and there's a huge amount of competition for land, and we are going to have to look to the oceans for solutions for increasing rates of carbon dioxide drawdown and going into negative emissions. And I think I don't have a magic wand for you. You know, I can talk about increasing ocean productivity. I can talk about ocean alkalinization, for example. None of these things, they're all on the drawing board. They're all being done in the laboratory. We haven't taken those out and done the field tests yet. But going forward, then that is an opportunity, I think, for the South.
David.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I suppose I just wanted to skip back at one point, if you don't mind, but it does link to what Rachael said there, something that Sarah was saying about net gain. And I think, you know, touching on the environment bill, you know, the amendment, which I'm sure has been spoken about with, you know, bringing in the, you know, nationally significant infrastructure to be able to apply to net gain. Well, you know, lots of that is on the coast, you know, around the Solent, water plants, roads, harbours, etc. But, you know, that amendment only really applies to the terrestrial environment or the intertidal environment. And I'm aware that Natural England will be consulting probably later this year on metrics for net gain for the marine environment, for the seabed. And I think that is really important. You know, think about for the south of England, you've got, you know, offshore wind farms, you've got, you know, interconnector cables joining the shore. There's the opportunity for an overall net gain from those developments, which, you know, we need clean electricity, we need low carbon electricity, and, you know, in the UK, offshore wind is really the only show in town if you're going to do that. So therefore, how do you get a net gain from those developments? But I just wonder, you know, at the moment it is very much a biodiversity net gain rather than an overall environmental net gain. And, thinking if there's other ways to bring in the carbon values into that, seeing as we're talking about carbon here, I think it'll be really interesting and challenging and not quick, but really, really important, I think.
Thank you. There's a question in the box about actually it's two I'd like you to think about. What role is there for planning authorities? And does the Solent Freeport provide an opportunity for encouraging a systemic approach to development? So yeah, your thoughts on the Freeport, I think would be really welcome. Yeah, planning authorities and Freeport. If anyone would like to go, yeah, Joanne.
So I think the ambitions of the Freeport in terms of carbon zero or climate positive, I think is incredibly ambitious and something that we need to work alongside and open some opportunities. But there are some really fundamental planning issues around marine resource use that we need to get our heads around. And these relate, one, to understanding the extent of the habitats we have, understanding the ownership of those areas of the seabed and the intertidal. There's a huge issue about permissions and licensing, about restoration on the seabed that is a massive barrier to nature-based solutions at the moment in action. And that relates to also often restoration is going in hand with very destructive extraction processes, such as seabed dredging. And now really we need to move on from this. So there's this planning and management of our resources that needs to go alongside not just protection, but restoration of we've lost so many valuable habits in the Solent already, but we're uniquely placed because we have historically such a rich ecosystem. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be lined up. We need to know what we've lost. We need to know what's potential we could put back, but that needs to be alongside the planning, the habitat mapping, and sustainable resource use. So we need to stop dredging the seabed. There are far better ways to extract or use or utilize fish and sustainable methods of aquaculture, multi-trophic aquaculture that offsets sort of nitrate or nutrient input from fish, etc. So I do think we do need a sort of Solent-wide approach to managing these things, because if you're restoring one bit but continue to dredge another in a really destructive manner, then you're not looking at the whole holistic approach to managing our seascape.
David.
Very quickly, I think just on the planning point you asked, Liz, really, I think it's really important, this licensing element. For all of us here or most of us here who are doing conservation activities or environmental enhancement activities, not having some sort of exemption or special license, which is effectively delivering the 25-year environment plan anyway on behalf of government, is something that should really be looked at as a matter of urgency.
Thanks, Alison.
One of the responsibilities I have as a Chief Executive of a National Park Authority is to be also a Chief Executive of a Planning Authority. So I guess I better speak on this one. I think probably most of you know that most of the things that are in sort of local plans these days are very much guided from what is ordained from the National Planning Policy Framework, and we've got a white paper out there at the moment around planning. I think you're probably all aware of that, and there are quite sweeping sort of proposals. So I think, what can local planning authorities do? I suppose in a nutshell, what's the policy coming down from national policy? And I know that sounds a bit weak, but unfortunately it's the case, because when you test some of these things with actual developments, you will lose your appeal if you don't follow those policies. And then you've got public money going against things that can't be won, which you could have been using on other things. So the policy, getting the policy right at this moment is very important. So having the NSIPs, included in the net gain, I think is really positive. But I would say that I really don't think it's perfect for our area, even biodiversity net gain, because it could, well, certainly where you're very rich in biodiversity, you could end up with taking less of the opportunities that you have in front of you. So I'm really keen actually that we, again, looking at the leadership point, that we set our own parameters almost like our own operating environment. What's to stop us as a partnership saying what kind of gain we want to achieve? Because what's often coming from the centre is probably, the most we can ask for the entire, country, which could be a lower denominator for us here than we actually have the ambition to achieve. So, I think I'd love to see us go, well, actually, this is our operating environment, and that it would be a lot better even than the net gain approaches from the centre, because that will, I actually think that differentiates us and gives us a USP and our businesses as well. So I'll leave it there. Freeport I could comment on, but I'll perhaps let someone else have some airtime.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you. Begonia.
So I think I feel for local authorities, because not only do they have this policy on housing targets and sort of national policies brought down, but also they're given more responsibility. So under the Environment Act, local authorities are going to be given a lot more responsibility for air pollution. And with this responsibility come a huge amount of risks. And in terms of the Environment Bill and the OEP, which you may have discussed, I'm sorry, I missed that session. The Office for Environmental Protection is going to be looking at significant national breaches of environmental law. And air pollution targets and climate change is a potential target. So not only are planning authorities being given a lot of responsibility, I can't speak about whether that's matched by resources, but also, there's going to be another regulator watching exactly what everyone is doing. So I think, a pincer on local authorities. And I think local authorities need to be really brave. And as Alison said, set their own agenda, because although policy might come from a central level, you can only implement these solutions at a local level. So local authorities do have a lot of power.
Alison, sorry.
Well, I ought to respond on the resources front, because our budget in the National Park is 40% in real terms less than when I started 10 years ago. So I think it has to be a joint responsibility. We can't get into this sort of, slightly parent-child approach, really, where we just think authorities that we as public are not really funding, I'll put myself in that bracket, are meant to solve all the problems. They're just not going to be able to do it, and we'll be having this conversation again forever. So I think this is Sarah Jane's point, where we need to step up and do better than that for our area. So if we want those regulators to do better, we need to make sure that they are resourced. And we need to kind of help them think about the solutions, that they're not going to have all the specialists they need necessarily in-house to give everybody the answers that they would like to see. And certainly somebody has sort of written about examples from elsewhere, but if we want to be on the cutting edge, we need to field our best people, particularly from our amazing universities, to be a part of that, not to sort of sit on the sidelines. So resources are a real issue.
Sarah Jane.
Thank you. Just picking up on that resources point, I think it's also being clever about what resources we want, and also thinking about what we need for the future. So what I experience often is that we don't have the right combinations of skill sets in being used in the right way, because often in local planning authorities we will have quite a traditional approach, and it's also almost giving local planning authorities perhaps the permission to be a little bit braver in terms of what skill sets they bring in to inform these discussions. And not just local planning authorities, that applies to all of us, but it's also recognizing that if we don't start thinking about those skills and resources fairly quickly, we are going to end up in a situation where in 5 or 10 years' time, it will be impossible for us to recruit people with the right skill sets because they've not had the training and the development that they need. So starting to think about how we bring that resource question into focus, not just for now, but also for a longer term resilience, again, I think is really important.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. I'm just conscious of time, actually. This is absolutely zipped by this hour. So much good discussion. If it's okay, I was just going to go on to one. Yeah, there was a final question, actually, and it kind of does relate perhaps to resources and being clever with what we've got. And that's a question around working with businesses. There was a question in there, particularly around businesses involved in the environment, so agriculture and food production. Does the panel see opportunities around nature-based solutions for businesses in the environment? Yeah, Sarah Jane.
I'll kick off just to say we are working with businesses, particularly farmers, and what we're sort of saying to them is, let us help you get ready for the business opportunity that is coming. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment helping farmers baseline their land so that they can identify where might there be opportunities for carbon, where that might there be opportunities for biodiversity net gain, and how does that fit in with their whole farm approach in terms of food production, etc. So we're sort of working with them to develop what we call natural capital plans, which are, 20-year plans, because actually anybody that's used to managing land is used to managing long term. And one of the challenges, of course, we have is that balance between sort of short term decision making from governments and from funding perspectives, whereas actually what we need is a long-term approach. So that is something I think that we can be really helpful with at the moment in encouraging landowners to actually get themselves geared up now.
Thanks. Anyone else on that? Yes, Rachael.
And I'm involved in a number of projects where we're rolling out field trials of for carbon dioxide removal across the country, and that involves forests, afforestation, reforestation, clever agriculture, so picking the right crops, but also using patchy agriculture to increase your carbon uptake, land management practices, sort of semi-technological solutions as well for increasing carbon uptake. So these are looking for solutions that are compatible with agricultural practices as a key part of what we're doing.
That sounds really interesting. Anyone else on that point? Yeah, Begonia.
Thank you. I think that one of the issues that businesses, and I'm thinking of farmers in particular, have is that we don't have the legal framework in place yet that can facilitate this. So again, in the Environment Bill, and I think conservation covenants, you might be familiar with them. It charges the land with a use, and it can be for perpetuity, but they can be revoked as well. So there's not a clear link between how you link natural capital to the existing legal framework. We're starting to think about this. The States has used conservation covenants very successfully. The proposal in the UK is slightly different. Even for this nitrates neutrality. We don't have the right legal framework. Okay, it's been used through the planning authority, but then where is there a national database of all these carbon credits or nitrates or phosphates credits? A farmer might be very happy to agree to put winter cropping on their land for 1, 2, 3 years. What about when the developer comes around and says, look, I want to buy your land, or when that land is going to go into another use that's not agricultural? So we still need to sort out the legal frameworks.
Excellent. Alison.
One of the frameworks which is not quite legal, but well, it is in the Agriculture Act, is the principle of public money for public good. So this is the design principle for the new environmental land management scheme that's being developed. So I would say that was an opportunity. So if we did, for example, have a natural capital baseline for our whole area, natural capital plans, which I love the idea of, Jane, I must pick up on that, for our landowners, they are going to hopefully be in the front of the queue with public money for public good. And by the way, I think that public money for public good should also apply to investments from local enterprise partnerships or public money, not just that goes through agriculture. I think that's really important, and that we need sort of audit committees almost around that in every sort of walk of life that gets public money. But yeah, I think there are instruments there, but again, it's about us. I think, we can say how we want to use them because no one's done any of this sort of stuff before. So we've got an opportunity.
Just one, well, we've got 2 more points, Joanne, and then Begonia. So 2 final points.
Yeah, so the experience from the States and Australia shows us that habitat restoration generates jobs. For $1 per tin, you get $8 back. From the spillover from maybe crab fisheries or other things, the construction. So this is a way of really generating economic growth in an area. You restore the biodiversity, restore the services, there's going to be huge benefits to other sustainable approaches. And the other main thing, if we innovate in sustainable aquaculture, it could be a real benefit to the area as well.
Really a nice hopeful point there. Begonia, did you just want to add a final point?
Yes, sorry, Alison, I was itching to jump in there, but no one knows what that means, that catchphrase. We have no framework around it yet. I think you're right, it's very beneficial, but we still have to put flesh on the bones, yes. And also, the EU subsidy system did do this. We seem to have thought that we've reinvented the wheel, but the EU used to give farmers more credits if they had hedgerows for habitats or bird nesting, etc. So this is not completely new. The principle, what I hope is that we will be really, really innovative in the framework we put around it.
Thank you. Well, with the time at just 2:01, I think we'll draw to a close there. I'm incredibly grateful for the panel's time this afternoon. I think we could have gone on all afternoon, actually. And I spotted in the comments saying, do we have the talent within the region to step up? I think we absolutely do. Certainly within our guests here. There's clearly lots to do, but there's a lot to be, I think, hopeful about, given all the things that you're working on through your organisations. So yes, I'd like to thank you again on behalf of Future South.